Remember that we all are brothers.
Remember that we all are brothers.
All people.
All people.
And beasts and trees.
And beasts and trees.
And stone and wind.
And stone and wind.
We all descend from the one great being.
We all descend from the one great being.
That was always there.
That was always there.
Before people lived and named it.
Before people lived and named it.
Before the first seeds sprouted.
Before the first seeds sprouted.
It's good to see you again. I apologize for my brightness. I'm not enlightened. It's just the it's just the skylight, which I have yet to get the shade installed, which will be installed. And so the next time we talk, I will not look like the
Casper.
enlightened guy. Yeah, like the enlightened guy in a movie. I'm trying to like hide and stick and move here. Let's see if I can move out here. No, it's even brighter. Look at that. I'm even brighter. So, you know, to all the teachers that said I wasn't bright as a young man, you were wrong. So let's just take a minute here. I'm going to introduce you. So this is Michael Thompson, and we met at a party. It was about 3 weeks ago, a month ago now.
Mhm.
And it's not often that I meet somebody who I can immediately connect with and then leave saying that's the most interesting man I've ever met. And I tend to speak in hyperbole, but I'm pretty sure that this one is true. So I want to start by saying thank you for being here. It's really, I think your story is an important story, and I think it's valuable for us to hear from all kinds of people in all kinds of walks of life. And I don't know that had we not bumped into each other and connected, that I would ever meet somebody ever with the story that you have to tell. And so I want to get into the story, but I first things first, I want to ask you how you're doing, man.
I'm doing well, and thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I also enjoy your company.
Thank you. So I guess we can just get right into it. So you spent 2/3 of your life in prison.
Mm-hmm. 45 years, yes.
45 years, 30 of those in the hole. I want to get back to explaining what the hole means, because I always thought it just meant solitary confinement, and my understanding, I think, was a little bit off.
Yeah, solitary confinement has a number of meanings. You know, you have solitary confinement where there's no human contact, and then you have solitary confinement where you're isolated to a cell by yourself, and oftentimes the physical plant of the prison itself is such that you can't really communicate with anybody, so you do so by fish lines and other means, but it still amounts to solitary confinement.
And that fish line thing's real, huh? You guys really like figure out. I mean, the human ingenuity is pretty wild that gets figured out, and it just becomes the way things are done, huh?
It's of necessity, yes. I mean, it's the thing that I think everyone as human beings seeks is connection.
Yeah.
And to be able to communicate within that connection. So fish line is about the only means by which you can do that. Now, sometimes they have air vents. They have an air ventilation system.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, depending on how it's set up, you can oftentimes talk through the air vents. I know individuals who have removed the water from their toilets and talked through the toilets.
Talk through the toilets?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know,
all the toilets are connected via the same sewer system, pipe system. So when you remove the water, it creates a channel.
I mean, they say humans will always find a way. I guess. I guess if you put the human really up against it, it's incredible what we're capable of creating. It's really incredible.
I agree with you. Yes, and again, it's wrought from necessity. And as you correctly point out, I believe human beings will find a way.
Yeah, it's incredible. So let's go back. So you were raised, you were born in Northern California.
I was actually born in just outside of Tehachapi, California.
Okay.
My mother was picking cotton at the time, and that's why she always referred to me as a dirt baby, because her water broke while she was picking cotton.
Oh, wow. And then you ended up on the reservation.
In Big Pine, California, yes, the Shoshone Paiute. At that time, there wasn't so much Shoshone, just basically Paiute. You had some Miwok, some Maidu, but primarily Paiute. It's at the base of Mount Whitney
Mm,
on the eastern side of the Sierras.
hmm And so tell me a little bit about what being on a reservation, what is that for a young boy? What does that look like?
Well, back then it was much different. Abject poverty,
Mm,
if you can imagine that. Tar paper shacks, dirt floors.
mm,
Some of them had just fire pits in the center of the floor. If you were living large, then you had a pot-bellied stove, and but pretty much abject poverty and, unfortunately, alcoholism.
mm. And so because there was nothing to do and alcohol was an easy out, it was just a way of escape, a way of checking out of sort of the constant unhappiness of what it was.
I think yes, with natives particularly, although I'm sure it applies to many other ethnicities.
Mm,
Um, Alcoholism is a form of self-medicating.
hmm And were you an alcoholic? Were you a drinker?
No, no,
You were never a drinker.
never a drinker. Never. I mean, I dabble now. At the party we were at, for instance,
Hmm
I had a shot of whiskey,
hmm
and on occasion I'll have a shot of whiskey.
hmm
Um, I like. I'm a pipe smoker, so I like a good cigar and a snifter of brandy, something like that. But all in all, I'm not much of a drinker.
Yeah,
Back then,
I saw
back
you
then
smoking a
certainly
pipe.
not.
I
Yeah.
saw you smoking a pipe, and I was like, "This is absolutely incredible." It's incredible because my grandfather smoked a pipe, and he smoked a cigar too, and it's pretty funny. He wouldn't just smoke a cigar; he would chew the thing, like
Right.
really
Hmm.
chew it,
Yeah.
and he would be walking around with like a brown ring around his lip. And my dad used to call him shit lips. He would we'd go to his house and he had like I don't know he had like a whole like how I have all these things on the wall. He had maybe 35 or 40 different pipes from different parts of the world that he had picked up, and he was so proud of his pipes. And then we'd walk in, and my dad and his father, all they did was make fun of each other. Their whole relationship was making fun of each other, which I guess seemed funny to them at the time, but for me as a little boy, like I was like, why are you guys being so mean to each other?
Hmm.
Um, and I firmly believe that I was actually in the right on that. I stand by that.
Hmm.
I don't think it's healthy for a parent to pick on his kid.
No.
I think they internalize it, and while it can on the surface come off as cute and we're just playing, um, it's like playing with a wolf. Every once in a while, you're going to get a claw, and it's going to hit an
Oftentimes,
artery.
yes. Hmm.
Yeah. So
When people are
I'm a
flippant like that, then oftentimes it's a mask.
yeah.
That unfortunately hides something inside, deeper that's going on. But this pipe here, now I understand when you talk about your grandfather and his collection of pipes. When I was in prison, I had at one time in San Quentin, I had a collection of 200 pipes, and but this pipe here, its name is Stove,
Mm,
and it's over 50 years old,
hmm
and it went through the prison system all 45 years that I was in, and the significance, the reason this pipe's name is Stove
hmm
is because I was on the east side of the adjustment center in San Quentin. That's
hmm
the overflow for death row. And back then, the department used to issue tobacco. So I used to stuff stove here with tobacco, and I'd get it just cherry red, and I'd wrap my hands around it, and that's what kept me warm because it was freezing. And
Oh
if I wasn't
wow,
doing,
really?
yeah, so that's actually how it's got its name, how it got its name. But I purchased this pipe in Laguna Beach in the 60s. So, and then I have many other pipes to my right here that are all favorites. But I enjoy it. And, it's like you and I have talked about previously, everything has a voice, and including stove.
That's incredible. Wait a minute. You were in San Quentin. Did you meet Richard Ramirez?
No, not to say that I met Richard Ramirez, and that's fortunate for me. But yeah, I knew of Richard Ramirez and many other individuals who, at one time or another, were on death row.
I lived in LA in the 80s, and he was like, that was the totality of my second grade. When I was in second grade,
mm-hmm.
like the fear that was cast on the city when
Mm-hmm.
that was all happening. It was incredible. And I was in second grade. How old am I in second grade? I don't even know, but I was young.
Yeah.
And I remember like asking my parents, like, is our door made of metal? What if he comes to our door? Like, it was a wild time.
Mm-hmm.
Wild time.
Yeah, that in and of itself, like many other things, can completely traumatize a child as well as adults. It did many adults,
Yeah.
and I think that was his intent.
Yeah. It was a crazy experience for
Yes.
me, for sure. So back to so you went into the system, you were 20. Actually, let's go back even further. So
Mm-hmm.
you had a moment, you were telling me, where everything changed for you when you were 5 or 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a moment where everything changed for me, and I was like 32. So I think I was a little more like cynical and jaded before it happened to me. But the way it happened to you was pretty incredible. And I'd like for you to speak to what happened, what led up to it, etc.
Sure. I was living on a reservation, and I oftentimes encountered native men who were liquored up, and they usually sat around in groups. And in this particular day, another boy had come up to me and told me that this group of men that was off in the distance wanted to see me. And I said, "Of course, what for?" He said he didn't know; they just wanted to see me. So I went over there, and one of them immediately snatched me up and began slapping me around. I had long hair, so he was holding me by my hair. Another one reached in and grabbed me by my genitals and lifted me off the ground, and then reached for his knife and made the comment that we don't want any more half breeds around here. So let's just get rid of this now. And as he reached for his knife, he was drunk. They were all drunk. He had dropped me to the ground, and I was bloodied, and I was able to get away from him only because they were drunk. And so I ran off into the forest, the wilderness there, and there was a grouping of large granite stones, and I climbed up a few of the stones, rather large, and determined that wasn't quite high enough. So I went all the way to the top, and I was sitting there, and I was crying and bleeding, and I had debris all over me from crawling through the brush. And I put my head back because my nose was bleeding, and suddenly I heard the wind in the trees, and it brought me around, and I realized it was like an epiphany or a revelation, call it what you like. Um, but I realized that just as I was aware of the tree people and the rock people that I was sitting upon, they were aware of me. And that became my connection. That became my family, actually, because at that point in time, I didn't really have a family. I was sleeping underneath an old teardrop travel trailer, 12-foot travel trailer. And, that's where I slept. And, I scavenged for food. They called me a res dog. And if you can imagine in your mind, scrawny little dog with its ribs showing, looking around for scraps or anything else that it might eat, that was me as a child. But this particular experience has always been important to me because it was my initial connection
Mm.
with nature. And not to say that I understood what was going on. It was only later when I went to live with my elder that I began to understand that connection and the significance of relationship to that connection.
What does that feel like? Tell me what that, I mean, I got to understand what that feels like to have to have like there's a feeling of there's a feeling of aloneness. I'm assuming that you felt like a real feeling of like you were scared. You're
Oh, of course. Up
deeply
until
alone.
that point, yes, you're correct insofar as the aloneness is concerned. What's significant in that is that as a result of that, I no longer felt alone.
Mm-hmm.
I no longer felt isolated. I had a family. I had the tree people, the rock people, the wilderness there, all that surrounded me, and that became my family.
And so that's the question. So in your body, because if the feeling of alone in your body, there's a hollowness, there's an emptiness. And when it gets filled up, when you feel community, and, for most of us, there's something valuable. Well, a lot of there's something valuable about when you're on a reservation and there's not a lot of stimuli. There's no television. There's no there's not a lot of uh, entertainment. You're not being entertained. So you're creating entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a loneliness in that. And I think that, in our culture, kids seek out screens because it's entertaining them. It fills the void that you felt.
Yeah. I think as adults, we understand the construct, if you will, of an awakening.
Mm.
But as a child, that young, certainly that was not the case.
Mm-hmm.
All I do know is that in that sense of awakening, it centered me, it settled me, it calmed me, and it literally gave me center, even as a child. And so, again, as a child, I didn't think, oh, I've had this awakening, I've had this epiphany, none of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that I felt connected. That much I can say.
And you felt that in your body, like you were aware that something was different from before.
Oh yes, it's holistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's holistic. It's all encompassing as it relates to the body, the mind, the spirit, um, everything that's going on. And again, of course, I wasn't thinking that as a child. It's only in retrospect that you understand that that's what happened, and give that application to where you're at today on your in your walk.
Mm-hmm. And so, okay, so this happens when you're very young. How did that affect how you walked through the world?
Well, I think that it freed me in my mind and as it relates to all my senses, so that I, at that point, I think began to live my life. Um, I did a lot of things there on the reservation. Some people might look upon as inappropriate, but I would. You had the typically white folks that would camp along the creeks there, because Mount Whitney fed these incredible creeks, and it's the only place in the world where you can find this particular species of cutthroat trout.
Mm-hmm.
So they would come up there to fish the trout. And back then they didn't have ice chests, but everybody would put their food into baskets, nets, and put it into the cold water to keep it fresh. And I would be on the other side of the creek, and I would slide down into the water and swim underwater to their nets, cut their nets open, take their food, swim to the other side, and then I would share that with the other kids. And then it was a matter of learning to snare rabbits, or oftentimes I just ran rabbits down. When you chase a rabbit for hunting purposes and it takes off, and if it hits a fence line, it will automatically turn itself towards that fence line and run up the fence line. So knowing that, you can triangulate,
Pit it.
where it's going to be when you
Sure.
cut across the field. So you're hunting rabbits, snakes, The Paiute particularly have the dubious distinction of being referred to oftentimes by other nations as bug eaters. And I don't have a problem with that. Grasshoppers or anything else, um, anything that high in protein and not necessarily all that tasty, but sustains you.
You got the job done, right? So,
Yes.
okay. So we're going through all of the trials and the tribulations of being on the res. Did you have job? Like, what was your job?
No, I had no connection. My job was to survive. My job was to find enough food every day to eat, and make sure that if it was in winter, that I was warm enough. Um, that was essentially my job. I used to, and I don't wish to give the impression that the reservation, in and of itself, was a terrible place. It wasn't. I used to go from shanty to shanty, um, and fry bread was the main staple. And many of the women would make fry bread in the morning, and so I would go to one shanty and I would, say, "Good morning, Mother Jane." And she would say, "Good morning. Are you hungry?" And I'd say, "Yes, Mother Jane." And so she'd make me fry bread. But in the course of that, she'd say, "Were you at Mother Mary's house this morning?" And I said, "Yes, Mother Jane." And she said, "Did she make you fry bread?" I said, "Yes, Mother Jane." She says, "Was her fry bread better than my fry bread?" I said, "Oh, no, Mother Jane." You see, so that's the politic of living on the reservation. And, again, that goes to the idea of what my job was to find sustenance to sustain myself. And I did that.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like a brutal experience, a very raw experience. It doesn't sound, but it also sounds like there was some endearing, like takeaways for you.
Well, you have no reference points, particularly as a child, to think that, this is a terrible way to live, or I live in poverty. You don't understand or know that you're living in poverty.
Mm-hmm.
You just simply know that if you're going to survive, then there's certain things you need to do, and you don't think of them as oh, this is a hardship, or the idea of constantly confronting adversity. But I credit, particularly that time in my life, with setting the stage for my ability to master, if you will. I don't often use that word, but oftentimes it has application, but to master adversity. And by facing catastrophic events from the time of a child.
Mm.
And I'm of the opinion that has a epigenetic effect on the body and on the mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you get put into the system, you're 22, correct?
Yes.
And I don't want to get into whether you did it or not, because I think that's for you to disclose. For it's not for me to ask. I believe that. But you end up in the system, and when you end up in the system, first of all, what does it feel like when this happens? When you get picked up and you end up in court, and you're like, holy shit, everything's different now.
Yeah, it's not so much that you think about different things that are occurring or how they're impacting upon you. There is no emotional regulation as it relates to that. Stoicism asserts itself as a matter of survival. And so you immediately, or at least I immediately, became stoic and stuffed everything and focused on survival. I did not think, I'd been running the mountains my whole life. I just come off the rodeo circuit as a bull rider, and the idea of being confined, being caged, and I am of the opinion that that's the worst thing you can do to a human being is put him in a cage. But it's the only time in my life that I actually contemplated suicide. And it's actually why I wear this rock person right here. This rock person looks exactly like a rock that was protruding from the face of the cement wall, high up on the wall, about 8 feet up. And, the rock people in my culture are very important. So I was standing in this cage and thinking, I can't live like this. And but I went up and I put my hand on that rock person, and it spoke to me. It just simply said, "It's going to be all right, little one." And that was enough. So that's why I wear this.
Okay, so I want to get a little bit into the culture. So there's you call rocks rock people, you call plants plant people, tree people, birds are the winged ones, etc. I think it's beautiful the way you do that in an honoring of what was here before us and what'll be here after we leave. And I believe that's where it comes from.
Yes, it is.
And it's interesting. I have a little chant, and you and I talked about this before, that a prayer that I'm going to be putting before this podcast that I heard at a ritual, a Norse ritual. And it's, remember that we all are brothers, all people, the beasts, the trees, the stone, the wind. We all descend from the one great being that was always there before people named it, before the first seed sprouted. And I believe that it is an honoring similar to that, correct?
It is, yes. It's of course nature based, and it's predicated upon the fact that the rock people, the tree people, the winged ones, the finned ones, the four-leggeds are our elders. They existed long before we did on the mother, this earth. And so it's a matter of respecting our elders and understanding that we as two-leggeds, as human beings, are children. And so that when we come face to face in any capacity, and of course at one time culturally we believed that we all spoke the same language, tree people, rock people, and in contemporary terms that's all oftentimes referred to as the multi-universe, another dimensional characteristic where you're able to access the energy of another entity. That to me is putting a little bit too much haha on it. And so I embrace the more simplistic approach of my relatives, my relations, and all my relations. And so you'll hear that oftentimes when, excuse me, you hear prayers or songs, homatakiase, all my relations, very simply. So that if you say that you want to live, and most cultures, indigenous cultures, that's the emphasis they place upon relatives, is that they wish to live amongst their relatives, all their relations. Matakie obanikataka like munui. And it's the idea of I wish to live amongst all my relations in synchrony, in relationship.
It's interesting. I don't pretend to know very much about this, and the reason I do this podcast is to learn. I'm not the type of person that can learn sitting in a classroom, and I learn interactively, and I that the purpose of this is to learn from people who know things, and my purpose in life is impact and to teach people this. And so if I ask you questions like I'm asking you to explain it like I'm a 6-year-old, it's A, because I'm like a 6-year-old, and B, and B, because a lot of people don't don't have a reference for
Right.
when you say relations, what does that mean? When you say when you speak to a culture that we don't know about, prejudice as a rule comes almost entirely from a not knowing,
My
or
older, yeah,
not
my older
knowing.
used to say, "Bigotry wears many feathers," and the idea is that unfortunately, as a society, we've become pretty disconnected from our natural environment, our relationship to that natural environment. So I understand what you're saying. And, the blessing and the beauty in relationship is that learning is a two-way street. It's never just one way.
Mm-hmm.
One of us is learning and the other's espousing whatever their philosophy may be or otherwise. And of course, the thing to remember about philosophy is that that's someone's opinion about the human condition. And so they're vast and varied as it
Well,
relates to that.
well, there's also because there's no such thing as an objective reality. Because
True.
in order for reality to exist, it has to be filtered through us and all of our and all of our spiritual and psychological and physical ailments and gifts and I could see the color green differently than you do, but we call it the same thing because it's the same, because it appears the same.
Mm-hmm.
There's just there's no way. So we could both be looking at the same accident and see something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt bigoted against as a young child because I was different, because
Mm-hmm.
all the other kids could sit still and all the other kids listen to their teachers, and I didn't. And so and whether or not I was being bigoted against, I felt that. And
Yeah.
so
Hyperactive.
incredibly hyperactive and like
Yeah.
ADD that was off the charts, unbelievable,
ADHD. Yeah.
all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I couldn't sit still, and I was fidgeting, and I still do. But I've embraced it, and it's not something that I feel shame about anymore,
No.
because it turned out in my old life to be a gift, because I was a salesman and I could be, doing 20 different deals at the same time. And it all made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see it as a bad thing. I see that there's a gift in all of our differences. But as a young boy, I felt bigoted against. I felt judged because of my differences,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that part of the goal here is to learn to understand people's differences, and the antidote to fear is knowledge.
Yes. My older used to say that every example we will ever need is found in nature. See, and that's essentially what you're talking about. We, unfortunately, are arrogant enough in our humanity to think that we have all the answers. And you and I both know there are no answers. You and I both are not seekers of answers, but seekers of choices.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're talking about here. So it's taking a situation, that impacts upon us psychologically and otherwise, and tuning that, to our own mindset and energy, and then utilizing it in a very positive way, not only to our benefit, but to the benefit of others. And that's the significance of the relationship to nature itself, that example, every example being found in nature.
I mean, life is a very, it's a metaphor to all degrees, and
Diversity.
right, and life itself is the guru. There's no, like, the life is the teacher. If your life feels like it sucks, it's asking you the question of what can I do? What can you do differently? It's not to dwell in it's sucking. It's to move out of reaction and into response to, okay, well, I'm feeling shitty. Okay, what can I be looking at? What difference can I be making within myself, with my connection to nature? With how many people do you know that have forgot that we as humans are nature? Maybe 80-90%.
Yeah, I think that's a fair estimate, unfortunately. I mean, I wish it were otherwise. I wish that, children were more focused on, what's going on and around them in nature as opposed to technology. And I'm not suggesting that I'm not a Luddite. I'm not suggesting technology doesn't have its place. It does, but it needs to be balanced, in what I refer to as a fourfold way. So, That technology comes in when we're talking about, especially socialization. The idea of how we socially interact with others. Technology has its place, but when we look at the other elements of that fourfold way, biologically, physiologically, and psychologically, and then of course spiritually as a foundation, and you bring that into balance, um, then I think we're on a better path towards realizing our humanity.
Yeah, I see some of the younger generation, and the kids don't look people in the eye.
No, they don't.
They don't, and that I don't really operate from a lot of fear when it comes to. I think that we as humans, like we were talking about when you were in prison, we'll find a
Hmm.
way.
Yes.
I don't really live in fear of the nuclear, like all the things, because if it happens, it happens, and we're going to be dead anyways, and we won't even know it. So it's not. It's
I
not.
understand fear on a very, very intimate basis. I've tasted it. I know the taste of it. It's acrid, and the key to dealing with fear, because we're all fearful.
Hmm.
That's part of our humanity. It's
Hmm.
it's hardwired in us.
For a
It's part of
purpose,
what's
for a
called
reason.
the well, it's called part of the HPA axis, fight, flight, freeze,
Hmm.
and so it's hormonal
Hmm.
as it relates to that, and it's based on how our senses interpret, um, what we're dealing with, and hormonally how our body handles that via the brain and otherwise. So once you understand that, then it's a matter of knowing that you're fearful, why you're fearful, and then pushing past that fear.
Yeah, there's a they've added a fourth element to that, and that's fawn, to fight, flight,
Mm,
freeze, and that's fawn. And it's interesting because the fawn is, I believe, what's led to this epidemic of codependence.
mm,
It's and it's interesting as an observer of life, which is really my deal.
mm-hmm,
It's how I became a coach, is because I have sight,
mm-hmm,
and watching the fawn out of fear. There's an epidemic really of abandonment issues
mm,
amongst people, and that's leading to a culture of low grade borderline personality of the culture itself, which is what cancel culture really is.
mm-hmm,
It's when people are splitting from people, but that's happening because of a lack of understanding. It's people in this intense judgment and not in curiosity of, well, where are they coming from? Where are they? Because they're so busy in their
yeah.
phone, and they're not, and without the human interaction, the human. Of course, you're living in fear, because people have a lot of balls when they say shit online that they would never say to your face.
Mm-hmm.
Would never.
What you're really talking about is a lack of intimacy,
Yeah.
genuine intimacy.
Yeah.
See, oftentimes people misconstrue or confuse what intimacy actually is, but it comes in a multitude of levels. My intimacy with my wife is one, my intimacy with you is another, and so on. Even with a tree person or a rock person, there's a sense of intimacy there, connection, relationship. And so when you remove intimacy from any relationship or any interaction, what you're essentially doing is um, devolving
Hmm.
our humanity.
Hmm. I
And
agree,
that,
and it gets masked with small talk, and
yes.
um and not asking the open-ended question to get the long answer, because you're too uncomfortable with sitting still for the answer, or you're looking at the shiny object over somebody's shoulder, and you're not
Mhm.
uh there's an unwillingness to get real. And
We'll just take listening as an example. I was taught that listening is a gift. And so that when you listen to someone, you do just that. You listen, you open yourself up and you listen. And that person knows that they're being heard. And that's significant. But that's the point of intimacy. When you remove that, you see, then the person doesn't feel like they're being heard. And there is no real dialogue, unfortunately. Um, and that part and parcel is the problem in communication, is that people think that they're talking to one another, um, but they're talking at each other.
Yeah, or they're looking to figure out the response to whatever they're saying to sound smart before they even hear what the person's
Yeah.
saying. You see, like you see
Well,
the
they're not hearing; they're only thinking about what they want to say.
yeah, you see the calculator, you see the math getting
Mm-hmm.
done. You
Mm-hmm.
can watch it happening, and
Mm-hmm.
and you know it's subconscious that you're watching it happening, but you are watching it happen, and you
Well,
know that they've checked out,
mm-hmm.
and then you start looking for the exit strategy.
So we both know the solution. I mean, we're emphasizing a basic problem in our society today, but we both know. Everyone always say, "Okay, we understand the problem, but what's the solution?" And the solution here is very simple. It's
Yeah,
called love.
yeah. It's love. It's you know, and from love, it's learning tools to
Mm-hmm.
stay engaged, whether it be active
Yes.
listening or being conscious of your context of how am I showing
Mm-hmm.
up to this conversation. If you feel yourself checking out, being aware, okay, I'm checking
Mm-hmm.
out, how can I get myself back here? How can I get myself
Mm-hmm.
back present? Can I put my awareness onto my breath, into my
Mm-hmm.
body, start to see things differently? Because when somebody is present, which you know you are in from you know from my experience
Mm.
incredibly present. You live
Thank
very
you.
much in the now,
Mm-hmm.
and th- presence is from for me the greatest gift you can give somebody. If you walk
Mm.
up to somebody this happened when I was in Canada with my family last year, and we go into the hotel, and we were in Banff. We were in Lake Louise, and it's I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's one of the
Mm.
most. You're basically on an acid trip the whole time you're there. It's the most psychedelic thing you've ever seen. It's the most
Mm.
overwhelming sensory experience you could ever
Mm.
imagine. And we get there and we get to the hotel, and I got real present. I got consciously present with the guy at the hotel. He ends up giving us a tour of the entire hotel for no
Mm.
reason. He left his station just to give us a tour of the hotel so that we would have this incredible trip. And because that happened, we ended up, staying in the president's suite. And, I spent way too much money, but we got really present with ourselves. And we ended up having this incredible experience just
Mm.
just because I was consciously present.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I just want to like put a mark on how valuable that really is.
Yeah, you're really talking about resonance. You see, energy, we know the value of energy. When we say everything has a voice, that's really what we're talking about. Everything has an electromagnetic signature, if you will,
Hmm.
to put it in more clinical terms. But the human body, of course, has an electromagnetic signature that coincides with the Earth's electromagnetic signature, so that when you come upon a place like you're talking about, it resonates. And that resonance makes you present, you see, and you're consciously aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I live in I live in Los Angeles, and obviously there's a lot of that, but I'm so used to it that it's the beauty of leaving and picking up that energy somewhere else
Mm.
is it's a new brand of energy that I got to connect to,
Mm-hmm.
and it really made an imprint, and Canada is really that for me. I'm
Mm.
I have a very real draw north. I always have north, and so my
We
wife,
share that.
yeah, my wife is from Canada. So,
Mm.
uh, all right. So back to the experience in prison. So you were in how many prisons?
Oh my goodness. You figure, well, when I first went into prison, there were actually only 2 prisons, and then there were 6 institutions.
Hmm.
So you had Old Folsom and you had San Quentin. Those were the only 2 prisons in California. And then you had, like I said, a half a dozen institutions. And oftentimes one was like at Vacaville, that was a medical facility. Dual Vocational Institute, that's where they sent youth offenders as well as adults to learn a vocation and so on. So I'd been in all of those. But in the 80s, the Department of Corrections essentially imploded and created, in total, 33 prisons. And, that also involved the development of security housing units. There was a whole shift in the prison system itself. And I've been in many of those. I don't know that I've been in all of them, but enough that I remember.
Mm-hmm. And wait, were you in Folsom when Johnny Cash came?
No, and had I been, I was in the hole.
Oh, so you wouldn't have got to be a part of that.
No.
So okay, so
I
what
went
puts
into the
you
hole and
what puts you in the hole?
Well, I was at Tracy at the time, and I had gone to work. My first job was for the chaplain, and our agreement was, but you want to remember that back then, as a native, I wasn't allowed to speak my language, which I know, and or practice my ways. It was against the law. So it wasn't until 1978 when they passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act that we were able to speak our language and practice our ways behind the iron gates.
Mm-hmm.
And but at this time it hadn't passed. So the chaplain, he and I made a deal. I would take care of his chapels. There was 2,
mm-hmm.
and he would afford me the opportunity to use the garden between the 2 chapels to practice my way of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be out there, and I had a small hand drum and an eagle fan and a rattle, and I would sing and I would dance, and unfortunately, because there was a great degree of ignorance relative to what I was doing and why I was doing it, it was perceived as devil worship, and so there was a point in time when some individuals attempted to kill me in the garden while I was worshiping, and that set off a stream of other events that led me to Old Folsom. And so I ended up at Old Folsom, and that was the big house. So that's where you had all your gangs and organizations. You had the Black Panthers, Black Guerrilla Family, Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, Texas Syndicate, Siboney's Liberation Army, Charlie Manson and his crowd. Just the list goes on, and they were all housed there in the hole. So that's when I went into the hole,
Mm-hmm.
and that was in 1975, thereabouts, maybe the year after that.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed in the hole in that type of confinement until 2000. Was it 2003? Yeah, somewhere in there, 2003, I think, 2004.
I mean, I have to ask you if you knew Charlie Manson.
Oh yeah, I spent 10 years with Charlie, and unfortunate human being.
Yeah.
The media made Charlie Manson, but Charlie Manson was essentially a 2-bit hustler. Unfortunately, he was a pedophile, and a lot of people don't really understand Charlie Manson or what was going on with him. I think more emphasis has been placed on his influence over the women that were a part of his family, as well as some men. But at any rate, I spent 10 years with him, and he recently passed over, I think, about 2 years ago.
Have you heard the stories about the LSD? Have you heard of a book called Chaos? I don't remember who it was written by, but there's a whole I don't know if it's even a conspiracy theory. I think it's proven to be true that he was part of some government LSD experiment, and that was kind of how he was brainwashing people, and it was like a whole insane, it's a crazy story. I don't really know that much about it other than I started the book and I didn't finish it because, again, ADD.
Yeah, I haven't read any books about it, but like I said, I knew Charlie. I knew all the men that were a part of his family and all the women. I used to use when I was at one point I was a gang leader inside prison, and I used to use Charlie Manson's girls to smuggle things into the prison.
So,
But
okay, so I want to get into that because that's a big part of this. And then remind me after, I want to talk about your relationship with Terrence McKenna. How do you end up becoming a pillar in the Aryan Brotherhood?
Well, back then it was based primarily on physical prowess. My elder, in growing up, when I left the reservation, I went to live with my elder on an Arabian horse ranch, and he was Nez Perce, half Irish. His native name was He Who Walks on Top of the Wind, but I just called him Walks on Top. But he's actually the one that taught me my ways, and facilitated my rites of passage, and in addition to that, taught me martial arts. Kind of a collective of martial arts, and then instructed me to make that collective my own, which I did. And back then, I was a big kid. I was 6'4", weighed 285, and had a pretty substantial skill set as it relates to perpetrating violence. And he had taught me how to knife fight, how to make a knife, all those things. And of course, that served me well within the controlled environment of prison where violence is currency.
So when I think of Aryan Brotherhood, and you and I've talked about this, and I was corrected, but I want, again, like I'm a 6-year-old, how, because you're a res dog, and I'm thinking Aryan Brotherhood, Aryan, white, and you're here to tell me otherwise.
Well, yeah, I mean, you hear Aryan Brotherhood, but you want to remember that its origins are with Irish white boys, essentially. And, that's where the shamrock comes from. And but back then, it wasn't about white supremacy or racism or anything else. It was about, one, controlling your environment, particularly in the context of protecting your population. So that you want to remember from the late 60s into the early 70s, this country was in turmoil. And you had the Black Panthers on the streets. You had the Sudanese Liberation Army, the Black Guerrilla family. You had, the Weathermen. I mean, the list goes on and on and on as it relates to the upheaval within our society. Well, that also carried over into the prison system. So the idea of any organization in prison, whether it be the Black Panthers, Black Guerrilla Family, Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, was to control their resources. And when you live in a controlled environment, of course, you strive to control your environment as opposed to it controlling you. And again, unfortunately, violence is the currency that's utilized there. So the Aryan Brotherhood had no foundation whatsoever in white supremacy. Matter of fact, when I was recruited into the organization, and I perhaps should mention that the first group to attempt to recruit me were the Black Panthers, and I declined, and I ended up getting in a knife fight with their leader. But then the second group was the Aryan Brotherhood, and I declined them also. But it was a few months later that 4 natives approached me who were Aryan Brotherhood and said, "Look, brother, we live better here in prison than we ever lived on the res. We know you're a res dog." And so I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" So they broke it down for me, how they controlled the resources. And in fact, they did live better in prison than they ever did on the res. But you had Samoans, you had Hawaiians, you had Mexicans, The only thing you didn't have were blacks.
Mm.
And that's because the black groups would not allow blacks to join the Aryan Brotherhood. They would kill them if they did. So, there was, now that isn't to say that that hasn't changed. It has. And, if you look at the Southern Law Center, you'll see that the Aryan Brotherhood's listed number one as it relates to hate groups. And, whether or not that's true, if I had to venture a guess, I would say that they're close on the mark. The biggest problem that I had, and one of the reasons that I left the Aryan Brotherhood, was because they had taken it upon themselves to start killing, assassinating innocent people, family members of individuals who were testifying against them, and men, women, children, elders. And I don't hold with that. I don't have a problem as a warrior going head up with a man in a controlled environment with knives or otherwise, and did that many, many times. But I do have a problem when you take that mindset and impose it upon innocent people.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been in a lot of situations where you went heads up with people, and you've paid dearly for that in a lot of ways. Numerous, I mean, ungodly amounts of times have you been shot, stabbed. What was it? 22 times you've been shot at similar times you've been stabbed. First of all, how the fuck do you survive getting shot 22 times? We can start there.
Well, it's not all at the same time. You want to remember that.
I hope not.
Yeah. When you're fighting, for instance, and knives are involved and groups are involved, or even if it's just individuals, there was a time when you could go head up and you had plenty of time. And so your knife fighting skills really came into play, because you could literally bleed your opponent to where he weakened. And then, that was the end of the trip. But that changed because of the physical plant of the prisons themselves and the security associated with that. So that you understood, for instance, in Old Folsom, that when you engaged in combat, you had to constantly keep moving. And, every time I was shot, I was moving. So, I told you about the altercation, the knife fight with the leader of the Black Panthers. Well, we were in a knife fight. He had actually challenged me, but we went head up. And in the course of that, he realized that he was losing, so he ran. And like a damn fool, I chased him. And in that process, I was shot in the back.
Hang on, I'm listening.
Yeah. So, and you have to contend with that, as opposed to being stabbed, which, as you correctly pointed out, that's occurred many times also. But the idea of being shot in this particular case, the projectile lodged next to my spine. The doctor decided not to remove it. It was removed 30 years later. But and your body goes into shock, and you lay up for a couple of weeks, not being able to move, and there's a number of stories that go along with that. But each time I was shot, what happens is that they take you to a clinic, they probe it. If it hasn't hit anything vital, they wrap it and send you back to your cell. That's the extent of it.
And so the guards would shoot you because from my understanding, in these prisons, weren't the guards playing a real integral part of these altercations? Weren't they like bookmakers and betting and getting making money and picking the fights and for their entertainment?
Yeah, it's called gladiator school. So when they see people pair off, they'll take book, and eventually, when they installed video cameras, they would watch the videos. It was entertainment for them. And
I mean, that is completely fucking insane. You know that?
Yes, but it's a reality nonetheless.
So they were their own gang.
Oh yes, they actually formed a gang called the Green Wall. And great book out by Bodeska, DJ Bodeska. And he was a member of the security squad at a particular prison. And he's actually exposed the gang itself. I mean, I was confronted by them on numerous occasions, endured beatings by them, but he's actually the one that exposed him, and it took enormous courage for him to do that.
Yeah, because their
And I
reach
know
must be real. I mean, this isn't.
it is.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
this can't be just.
That's why I say
This can't just be in the prison. I mean, these are people that are connected to law. Didn't you say that there were like some of the guards were like Hell's Angels?
yes, yes.
Like, how
But
fucked does
some
the
of the
system
guards,
have to be for that to happen?
well, now some of the guards were Aryan Brotherhood too. Some of the guards were Mexican Mafia. Some of the guards were Black Guerrilla Family or Black Panthers. So, you want to remember going all the way back to the 70s that correctional staff weren't paid very much.
Mm.
And many of them at that time were Vietnam vets returning from Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
and suffering from PTSD. Nobody knew it back then.
Mm-hmm.
But no, they were extremely vulnerable. They'd been extremely traumatized. And it made perfect sense to me that they would align themselves with a group or an organization, or call them a gang if you want, within the prison system. And then, of course, you had a lot of drug traffic back then. And, that primarily went through the guards too, but they could make in one shipment, bringing one shipment into an institution, they could make a half a year's salary. And so, that moved a lot of people,
Yeah,
the whole idea that
I mean, there's a motivation there, no
there is
doubt.
a motivation. Yeah. And so, and it certainly isn't for me to judge one way or another.
But it's all
I make the option.
to judge. We don't ever want to judge, and we always want to be
Yeah,
curious. But to be
right.
curious when there's a system that's put in by our government at whatever level it was, because these weren't private prisons, at least at the time.
Right.
There is an agreement, and I don't believe in expectation without agreement, but there's an agreement that we as a population have made with our government that the prisoners are the prisoners and the guards are the guards, and there's
Mm-hmm.
there's a separation
Mm-hmm.
between the two, and that the
Yeah.
guards are there, you know, are there to keep the peace, to protect the prison, to protect the prisoners,
Mm-hmm.
etc. I mean, we're not, we're not in, we're not a third world country.
Well, you want to remember that when we're dealing with a prison population, we're dealing with the disenfranchised as it relates to that. So the issue doesn't really begin in prison. It begins in the judicial system, in the court system, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done there.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't to say that progress hasn't been made, but there remains uh, just a huge amount of work that needs to be done toward helping the disenfranchised
Mm-hmm.
understand what's going on. They come from, the inner city, and I hear people, oh, don't make these excuses. It's not a question of excuses.
Mm-hmm.
It's as you and I were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reality,
Mm-hmm.
insofar as they need to survive, they need to, maintain whatever lifestyle is available to them.
Mm-hmm.
And but when they come into the judicial system, they need to be properly represented,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to be sentenced accordingly. I'm not suggesting that there isn't a place for punishment as it relates to crime, but that's where the problem starts.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because you see it in the jails, because prior to going to prison, you go to jail, and then you go to court from the jail, and so you see the very same thing that we're talking about relative to prisons exist in the jail system. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and the issue behind that, from my perspective, is education. It's one of the reasons that I do different interviews that I do, or my own podcast, or write, or whatever, is to educate,
Mm-hmm.
and that's based on a body of experience that I have over the last 50 years.
I mean,
And
I find it to be really incredible that you have been through what you've been through and you are so present, you're so deeply connected. I don't even
Thank you.
hear you being resentful of what you've been through, and to be able to not go into victim.
There's no value in resentment. I've never found any equation.
Well, but
Um,
people find value in it. There
no,
actually
yes.
is no value, but people do
If you
find
choose to
value.
find value in it, you will.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the issue. I've always chosen not to find value in it. The most important thing to me, um, this may sound somewhat narcissistic, but is my humanity. And
Why is that narcissistic?
well, we're all narcissistic by degree.
You have to
I mean,
be.
it's part of it's a human
Yeah, you
trait.
have to be.
Yes, but it's how far you go with that. And so again, that comes down to choices. What we choose to engage, what we choose to embrace by way of character, personality, values, ethics, beliefs. And the point in that is understanding what all those things are, where they come from, why you believe what you believe. Where did it come from? And oftentimes we as human beings don't make the effort to engage that process. Now, I was fortunate in that I had a lot of time um, to embrace my spirituality
Yeah.
and my way of life.
Yeah.
And so I was able to contemplate these things. And then, of course, my life experiences put those things to the test. You always find out what your beliefs are when they're put to the test. So if they stand up to it, great, that's your belief. But if they don't, you better reevaluate. And oftentimes, I think as human beings, that's a mistake that we make. We don't reevaluate once we find out that our beliefs aren't what we thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And also being open to at some point in your life coming to terms with the fact that what you thought was true wasn't.
yes.
What you thought you
You
believed
see,
to be true, it
mhm,
might not be true. And I think if we're open to that possibility, we're open to
yeah,
finding joy, because I don't know if we're
yeah.
finding joy if we're fighting for an old belief system.
Well, particularly if you don't understand where that belief system comes from, or excuse me, that belief system has not been tested.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been passed on. It's a generational characteristic. You see, your parents or your uncle or whomever instilled in you a value system.
Or a
About
religious
what.
system.
Well, there's that too, and I certainly don't have a problem with religion. I don't subscribe to it myself,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a personal preference. For those who do, I think they're blessed, and I think it provides discernment, direction, and the ability to correct in the face of adversity.
I agree. I think what's interesting about religion for me is when it is I love if each individually believes in the religion,
Hmm.
great. But
Hmm.
what I see happen is it becomes tribal,
Mm.
and also there's an indoctrination. There's a because look, if you're born into a family that's religious, you're just by birth, by the lottery ticket, you're that.
Hmm.
and
Yes.
and so there isn't a choice, but you're conditioned a certain way to believe a certain way, to believe in a certain
Hmm.
to certain sorry, I have like a hair, uh to believe what they believe, and there's a lack of choice. It's like when you're born, you're given a name, and that's your name.
Hmm.
You didn't get to choose that shit. My name's Scott. Well, I don't want it to be that.
Well, see, actually, in my culture, that's not the case.
Right, but I'm saying
Yeah,
right, because you have like 6 names.
I have four.
Right,
Yes.
and which we'll get into, but what I'm saying is that and we're too young to make that choice, obviously, when we're born.
Hmm.
But I think you and I talked about this. What the Amish do is they
Hmm.
let the kid, and listen, when you're born into that, you're born into some shit. But when but they give them like a month or two to go out into the world, lose the identity, and then decide
Yes.
if this is the life you want to choose. I actually
Hmm.
I like that. I admire
Yeah,
that they're willing
yeah,
to
I
take
do
that
too.
chance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that every religion should do that. I think that because religion's great until the magic becomes a business. I think it's very strange that there are religious leaders that are making $50 million a year flying in private jets and own stadiums. Like, what are we fucking doing here?
Mm-hmm.
It's wild. It's wild.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that there's a benefit to people being a part of something and community and all of that. But holy shit, people, we are missing the point.
The issue for me is, again, it goes back to our humanity. Regardless of what one engages in by way of religious pursuit or otherwise, if they believe that makes them a better human being, and if indeed it does, then I think that's a beautiful thing. It's a blessing.
I agree. I agree. If it gets weaponized, I tend to, I take issue with a couple of things with organized religion. When the religion is making the decision for you rather than your individuality making a decision for you, I have a problem with that. I do.
Yes.
I have a problem with that. When it's used as a reason for conflict, there are 8 billion people on this planet. Which means there are 8 billion different ways to connect to God, to source, to nature, inside to outside. There's no right way to do this thing.
Yeah, my elder used to say we're all going to the same place, just taking different paths.
Exactly. And for somebody to say that my way's the way and your way is no good, to me is a hunk of shit. And it's arrogant and it's rude and it's not and it's devaluing somebody's personal experience and as humans, if we really look at it, our job is to collaborate with other humans to create great things, not to stomp people down so we can look good.
I agree.
Yeah. So, and I knew you agreed, and that's, you know, when I met you and I saw you, I was like, I literally walked up to you and I said, you're my people.
Yes, you did.
I did. I want
to
talk.
And it's true.
And it is true. Because I think a lot of it is because you're a critical thinker. I see that you don't conform. I don't think you conform really to anything. I think you're uniquely yourself and very aware that that's all you have to be. That's all you want to be, is just yourself.
Yes.
And I appreciate that because I feel like I'm the same way. I want to talk about sweat lodges in prison.
Okay.
So you said, what was the year? So you said that you began at a certain point to be allowed to speak your language. And
that was in 1978 with the passage of the Public Act 1996. It's the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And what that essentially did was it allowed Native people behind the iron gates to practice their way of life. And I want to emphasize that it's not a religion. It's a way of life. But they had to utilize the Religious Freedom Act to practice their way of life. And so we started building sweat lodges, and the elders started sending in regalia, feathers and flutes and drums and rattles, and so we were able to dance and sing and hold spirit lodges, which commonly referred to are sweat lodges. But
is it a spirit lodge or a sweat lodge, or is it just nomenclature?
Well, it is nomenclature. It's sweat lodge is how it's typically referred to because observers would see individuals go in, and they would sweat or they would experience themselves, and so they would sweat. You bring the rock people in from the fire, you put them in the center. That's the mother's womb. You pour water over them. It creates steam. We call it grandfather's breath or grandmother's breath, depending. And and then it's a purification ceremony. And
Is there medicine or no
that,
medicine?
Oh yeah, you have your 4 primary medicines in each direction, and then there are other medicines that oftentimes come in depending on the ceremony that's being held. And then of course you have the people's pipe in relationship to that. Our first medicine is tobacco,
Mm-hmm.
and we offer that, call spirit to that, make prayer ties with it. And then of course we have sage that we purify with, and cedar.
Mm-hmm.
Other sweet medicines, either sweetgrass or lavender,
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the nation.
Mm-hmm.
The woodland tribes tend to go more with lavender up towards Canada, and the East Coast there and into the woodlands tend to go with lavender. But when you get out onto the plains, then you get sweetgrass, and sweetgrass is typically referred to as the mother's hair. That's why you see it in braids. The irony, I suppose, in that is that there is no longer any sweetgrass that grows wild naturally. It's all cultivated. And whenever you cultivate a plant, you diffuse its power, its source, as opposed to growing
Naturally, sure,
wild.
sure.
And a lot of individuals that have made the trip to Peru for the experiences that are associated there with the plant people,
The ayahuasca
have
experience.
attempted to bring those plant people back to the United States and plant them and cultivate them, and found that their potency was practically nil as it relates to being a medicine. So that here, when we use medicines in the spirit lodge or sweat lodge, such as sage, we know who's gone out and harvested that, and it's been harvested in a good way. And by good way, I mean that the family typically that goes out and harvests that will take only what is needed, ensuring that enough is left for the environment, for the plant itself, and so on. And that's a critical component of that. In your tobacco, you have your old Reese tobacco twists and different things, and then of course you have the people's pipe and personal pipes that people have also for the consumption of tobacco in ceremony. And you have some lodges that are referred to, for instance, amongst the Anishinaabe as cedar lodges, and that's where cedar becomes the primary medicine associated with that. And you actually have a man or woman that sits in the west and spreads cedar over the hot rocks, and that's a gift in that, because of course you don't want to smoke everybody out of the spirit lodge.
No, you don't. And so you would do this, you were saying, once a week while you were in prison. This was in Folsom, or this was in St. Quentin?
Well, in Quentin, I only was able to sweat there once. That's because I was in the hole. In Folsom, we didn't have that. It was in later years at other institutions. Those of us that were in the hole weren't really allowed to participate in the sweat lodge on what was called the main line. But for instance, when I was in the hole at Corcoran, it was a security housing unit, the hole. I was able to call Circle of Elders to the prison. And it was the first time that the elders approved the use of a fire pit, a medicine wheel, a dance circle in a security housing unit. And so, you had that oftentimes your sweat lodge ceremonies are not the only thing that you engage in. If you have a medicine wheel, or you have a fire pit where you can make a spirit fire, and then you can really engage in any ceremony. You fast 4 days, you fast 7 days, sometimes longer, depending on what you're doing. And then if you have the people's pipe, which I carried for 25 years behind the iron gates with the permission of the elders, then you can conduct pipe ceremony without the use of the sweat lodge. And I did that for many, many years.
So to explain what the people's pipe is and what a pipe ceremony is.
Well, the people's pipe is typically made from what's called bloodstone. And there's only one place in the world where you can actually find it. And the creation story as it relates to that is usually associated with Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, although you'll get some Anishinaabe nations and Kiowa and other nations that attribute that to their own creation stories. But creation story is that at one time, just like the flood and Noah, that the Creator did not like what he was seeing relative to human beings and what they were doing, the warfare that they were engaged in. So essentially the story is that the world was turned upside down and all the people were brought to one place as they died. And that is now referred to as bloodstone for that reason, because it's red. And it is said that's where all the people came to rest. So that bloodstone is harvested and then carved. In my particular case, the people's pipe came to me when I was at San Quentin. So there was a gathering of 50 nations up north, Pacific Northwest, and they came down and they told me that they had carved a bloodstone pipe bowl and had buried it beneath the fire, and it would remain under the fire for 16 days. And if it withstood the test of the fire, then that was an indication that it was meant to come to me behind the iron gates, because up to that point, no pipe had been brought behind the iron gates. And so as they were coming south, they stopped at O'Neill Island, and that was an internment camp for natives. And it's actually where, unfortunately, the government gave blankets that were infected with tuberculosis to the natives.
This was by design, or this was it just happened?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you.
And I don't know. Had I been there, you see, you ask a native, and a native will say, "Well, of course it was by design." You ask the government, and they say, "Of course it wasn't by design. We don't do things like that. We don't wipe out your buffalo so that you can no longer sustain yourself. That would be inhumane. We don't create reservations and feed you rotten meat, because that would be inhumane. But in reality, we know that those things actually occurred." So, but at any rate, these natives, this internment camp for
we
natives,
lost internet there for a second.
Tens of thousands perished as a result of not tuberculosis. I take that back, smallpox, and as a result of smallpox. So the rafters in these buildings that were built to hold the natives were made of big cedar trees. And so the elders, in coming down, went up and harvested a piece of cedar from that and made a spiral of life stem for that pipe bowl. And then they made me a medicine bundle for it that was absolutely beautiful. So it's too late now to make a long story short, but
to sum it up.
Yeah. To sum it up, the pipe came to me with the medicine bundle, and I began to conduct ceremony behind the iron gates, starting at San Quentin.
That's incredible.
And and that was a blessing.
That's incredible.
A real blessing. Yeah.
So, okay. So, Mr. McKenna, how do you get into relationship with him?
Who?
You said you were, was it Terrence McKenna you were saying you were in a relationship with? We were talking about psychedelics before.
Yeah, Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary. Sorry, pardon me. Timothy Leary.
Yeah.
How did you meet Timothy Leary?
Well, he had a place at Woodland Canyon Drive in Laguna Canyon, and my elders ranch was just on the other side of the mountain from there. I used to bring cattle over every morning into the lower pastures by horseback, and so I would oftentimes a lot of hippies back then, and particularly the women running around naked, and for a young boy on horseback, and that was a point of curiosity. But yeah, he had a small house there in Woodland Canyon Drive, and you know, it was open to virtually everybody. And he had a big glass bowl, and in that were transparent hits of lysergic acid, LSD,
like
and
gel
people would come.
taps kind of thing. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so people would come in and they would just lick their finger and stick their finger in that bowl and then lick their finger off and grab a goat bag full of wine and head on up into the canyon and to have their experience. But that's how I met him, to answer your question. And but a very interesting person.
I mean, look, you're a guy that was in prison for 45 years and you've lived more life than 90% of the people I've ever met. This is incredible. It's
Hmm.
insane.
Well, it's what did the Japanese say? Fate.
I mean,
Um,
there's a beauty, real beauty to balance. And
hmm. I agree.
and I know how much you love birds, and
Hmm.
you have there's a balance that you have as a poet and also a warrior, and it makes the bird fly straight as it relates to you that I see. There's a savage.
Thank you.
There's a savage that is who you are. You are a
Yes.
savage. And
Yeah.
also there is an artist, and it's and a very deeply spiritual um man. And
Thank you.
I just want to commend, you know, that I recognize that in you, and I recognize that the poet and the artist is not in conflict with the savage, which I think is the gift, is that they accept each other as they live in you. And
The mediator between that is the child.
perfect. And yeah.
You see, that's what's so important about what you're saying. And I appreciate it. And likewise, see it in yourself.
Yeah.
But, it reminds me of the samurai,
Mm,
the artist on the one hand, that creativity, and the warrior on the
mm,
other. And, unfortunately, I think relative to the Japanese history, it was Bushido that was in the center to create the balance, very balance that you're talking about. And it didn't work, unfortunately, because the human condition got in the way.
mhm,
But what you're talking about insofar as that balance between the savage, the warrior, you see, and the spiritual person is the child.
mm,
And it's recognizing that I am a child
mm,
and that all that I approach in life, I do so as a child.
mm.
I ask for permission for everything that I do because of that. You see.
So before we exit, I want to talk about your. Well, I want to take a moment and, you know, sitting with you is a real honor. You're
Thank you.
the there's a there's a kindness, and
Mm,
I see what a fan of life you are. I see what a
mm.
fan of experience you are, and I see how gracious you are, and I don't understand how it's possible to be as kind as you are, coming from what you've come from, and as evolved, and really elegant. And I'm not just saying this to gas you up. I'm saying this because I
No.
believe it to be true. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I just want to thank you, and I want to talk about your relationship with your wife, how you guys
Mm.
met, what you are now doing in the world, and how people can further come to know you.
Mm. Thank you,
Mm-hmm.
Scott. My wife is my mentor and has been my mentor for 20 years. I met her when she was working. She's a mitigation specialist. She works primarily with prisoners on death row and their families. And she was sent by a client who was facing the death penalty, Aryan Brotherhood member, to come talk to me, to interview me. And I was in the hole in Calipatria, I think, at the time. And she came in. She first wrote to me, and she came in to see me. And she understood immediately. Her client had sent her to get me to recant my testimony in various cases that I had provided against the Aryan Brotherhood and other factions of organized crime. And so he was sending her to get me to recant my testimony. And of course, she understood within the first 15 minutes of the interview that that simply was not going to happen. So, but we immediately connected spiritually. And, she's Japanese, so, Shinto is her background, as well as Buddhism, but she subscribes more to Shinto, as a nature-based ideology. And so, we began talking about that, and 6 hours went by, and we hadn't even realized it. And so, we began writing each other, and she began visiting me, and she visited me for 10 years. We were great friends. And I've learned so much from her, and will continue to learn from her. And so in 2014, while I was at Lancaster, we married. And so we also started Live, Learn, and Prosper. And that was wrought from the idea that many programs were being offered to individuals that, were short to the house, what's called short to the house. They were going to be paroled soon. So they were being offered these programs to help them contend with various issues, but nothing was being offered to lifers or individuals that had a lot of time to do, and that's where you want to begin that process is when, they've got the time to embrace a different philosophy, essentially. So we had a lot of people that had stepped away from gangs, and at one point there at Lancaster, we started this nonprofit, and we had 600 individuals, and we had 15 groups of 25 people in each group, and we ran from 7 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was quite successful. So we installed that in 4 different prisons, and then the state of California paid for me to go and take a classes. It was a year-long class. It was supposed to be 2 years, but we stuffed everything into a year as a alcohol and drug counselor. So I'm a certified alcohol and drug counselor. I'm a biologist by training, educationally, but so I incorporated those two relative to the idea of helping people. And of course, as a biologist, I have to tell you that my emphasis on and my doctorate was on wildlands and wildlife. But it wasn't until 2000 that I began to give that application to human beings. So that's when I got into the study of epigenetics and the environment's impact upon cellular regeneration and things like that. You couple that then with my wife, Ariel, who is a genius. She's brilliant. And I mean, pick a subject. I mean, I was always fascinated with quantum physics. And the first time we talked about it, I realized that I knew nothing about it. And, it was a great check, on that. So, for me, with her, it's pick a subject, but it's her humanity. It's her ability and her capacity, her compassion, for others, her love. There's a sign sitting right here on you. You cannot hear someone's story and not love them. See, and I really believe that.
Yeah.
So the idea here of what we do with Live, Learn, and Prosper is that we have a website that we're bringing up for her called Coaching for Life. And then we have the Live, Learn, and Prosper website, which we're still working on. The learning curve for me is huge. I'm learning technology. I'm sitting here talking to you in my own studio that I put together, but and that may sound simple, but it wasn't for me. And I'm still learning computer technology. I'm still learning, the ins and outs of social media. And so we just published a book called Warhorse, 45 Years in Prison, The Remarkable Life of Michael Thompson.
Is that on audio, or is that just hard right now?
It's right now it's an ebook. It'll be a paperback in another month.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to do an audio. I've been asked to do an audio. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to. And then we have, it's a trilogy. We have 2 more books following that. And, I would love to get Ariel on a podcast, but she doesn't like the video part. She'll do the audio part. and
I'd love to talk
but
to
she
her. I'd
has.
love to. I'd love to dig
Oh
into
my
this.
goodness, Scott, I'm telling you, she has a body of work that once people begin to realize just how wise this woman is,
Mm,
this human being is, and what she has to offer to
mm,
others, toward healing, um, you know, is amazing. And I speak from experience, in
of
that,
course.
because just stop and think that after 45 years in prison and engaging in stoicism, regardless of my spirituality,
Mm,
that I had absolutely no emotional regulation. It had been arrested. The moment they arrested me, it arrested my emotional
mm,
regulation. So when I was released a few years
mm.
ago, I had no emotional regulation. She actually had to teach me, what that was and what it meant, and encourage me to make it my own, relative to that.
Well, you have to be
So
you
she,
have to be, along with having the knowledge, you have to be a hell of a salesman to get somebody who's been in prison for as long as you were to buy in. There has to be, you have to have a big vibration. I don't believe a salesman is someone who gets you to do something. It's someone who enrolls you in their vision. And,
yes,
and that's coming from, I was in sales and still am to it.
it's a great observation. I mean, it is. And that's essentially what we do. One of the things that we emphasize, not only as it relates to judicial reform, but touching base with these individuals and their families prior to these individuals being released, so that when they come out, they're prepared. That the families understand that there's going to be an issue with emotional regulation,
Mm-hmm.
you see, and that, it's a support mechanism, but it's toward ensuring that they are released into society as productive members of society,
Mm-hmm.
and that they don't um, revert
Mm-hmm.
back to their old conditioning, whatever that may have been, whether that's alcoholism, substance use, or just crime in general.
Mm-hmm.
So it is something near and dear to our hearts. We're very passionate about it. I mean, we're both in our 70s now, so we realize that we've got uh, 15, 20 years, good years um, left to take the experiences that we have and share them toward the benefit of others.
Well, I love the way you talk about your wife. I talk about my wife the same way. She's a legend, genius. Um,
Mm, mm.
I'm sad that you don't have an Instagram that I can send people to, and we got to get this situated. You have, there's so much to say, and there's that's such a, I feel like it would be such a way for people to reach you. We'll get that going, but
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say thank you for your time. I know we'll do this again, and I'm sure I missed 1,000 things we could have talked about. I'm just learning how to do this, and I just want to say thank you for your patience. Thank you for showing up.
Well, this was a great experience, Scott, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.